let's kick things off with a massive historical mystery. How exactly did late 19th century Vienna serve as the ultimate incubator for three radically transformative schools of thought? We're talking about a single city at one very specific moment in time that literally rewrote the rules for how we understand music, art history, and economics. It is just this incredible historical coincidence that these completely unrelated fields, which on the surface have absolutely nothing to do with each other, converged in one place to essentially build the paradigms of our modern world. To wrap our heads around this, we'll structure this explainer by first looking at the crucible of Vienna itself, before opening three distinct doors of innovation: music, art history, and economics. Finally, we'll tie the whole shebang together with the legacy of Vienna. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the crucible of Vienna. Seriously, how did one single city rewrite the rules of modern thought? It's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. To answer this, we really have to understand the sheer scale of change happening at the time and the intense, high-pressure environment that everyday citizens were navigating. I mean, it was a world that frankly felt like it was tipping over. Just picture Vienna in the late 19th century. It was the bustling, grand capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The city literally tore down its old medieval walls to build the Ringstrasse, this magnificent monumental boulevard. Demographic growth was absolutely booming, and a feverish economic optimism took hold. People felt totally unstoppable. But then, bam! The Great Crash of 1873 hits. The stock market plummets, and that euphoric economic boom turns into a devastating bust literally overnight. Imagine the psychological whiplash there. You have a society caught in this massive tension between deeply entrenched tradition, soaring industrial progress, and a sudden, violent economic reality check. And it's exactly that friction that created an incredibly fertile ground for radical, unprecedented ideas to take root. Moving on to section 2, let's open our first door: music and the second school. So the crucial takeaway here is the radical break from the traditional late Romantic tonality of the past. The first Viennese school, and here we're thinking of legends like Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, was firmly rooted in a tonal center. Their music had gravity, right? You always intuitively knew where the melody was home. But the second Viennese school, led by Arnold Schoenberg, pushed into a totally chromatic expressionism that lacked any firm tonal center. If you aren't a musician, just think of it like this. It feels unsettling. It's unpredictable. It's like musical gravity has just been completely turned off. They stepped entirely outside traditional keys to create what we now call atonality. Now, to give this new zero-gravity sound some structure and to keep it from just collapsing into pure chaos, Arnold Schoenberg developed a revolutionary method. He decided that all 12 tones of the Western chromatic scale had to be used equally. Instead of favoring a specific key, a composer arranges all 12 notes into a specific sequence to form a prime series melody. And here is how strict this rule was. No single note could be repeated until all 12 had been played. It was almost like a complex mathematical puzzle that Schoenberg forced himself into just to ensure every single note had absolute equality. But they didn't stop there. It gets even wilder. Composers like Alban Berg and Anton Webern applied intense mathematical discipline to manipulate these atonal melodies. Think of it as mind-bending musical geometry. Once you have that prime series, you can play it backward, which is called a retrograde. You can play it upside down, which is an inversion. You can literally flip it and reverse it all at once. It was a completely new, mathematically rigorous way of composing music that just threw out centuries of emotional romanticism out the window. Okay, let's open the second door. Section 3. Art history becomes science. Before this era, traditional art history relied heavily on aesthetic preference. Let's be real. It was basically just wealthy patrons and critics arguing over what painting looked the prettiest or felt the most moving. But the Vienna school wanted to put the discipline on a truly scientific basis. They wanted to distance themselves entirely from what they considered arbitrary judgments of beauty. So instead of judging art based on personal taste, they established rigorous analytical concepts to understand works from all periods completely objectively. It's fascinating to see how this builds into an escalating story of strict analysis across generations. It's like a relay race. First, we have the pragmatic approach with Rudolf Eidelberger, who focused heavily on objective historical sources and facts. Then, Alois Riegel takes the baton further with formalism, stripping away the subject matter entirely to look purely at formal qualities like line and color. Max Dvorak then pivots slightly to an idealist method based on intellectual history. And finally, Julius von Schlosser introduces a structuralist, philological approach to written sources. Each scholar relentlessly built upon the last to create an ironclad analytical framework. Let's open that third door. Section 4, Economics and Subjective Value Theory. Okay, we need to dive into this massive shift because it's a real game changer. To fully appreciate it, we have to remember what economists believed at the time. Classical heavyweights, we're talking everyone from Adam Smith to Karl Marx, based their theories on objective labor cost. They firmly believed a good's value came objectively from the labor required to make it. But in 1871, Karl Menger came along and argued that value is actually completely dependent on the subjective needs of the individual. Value wasn't inherently baked into an object from sweat and toil. It comes entirely from how a human being subjectively values it in that specific moment. To explain this, Menger used this brilliant, relatable example of a farmer prioritizing a stockpile of 200 bushels of wheat. The farmer grades his needs from sheer survival all the way down to luxury. First, he obviously must feed his family. Second, he saves seed for next year's crop. Third, and I think this tells you a lot about his priorities, he uses wheat to make beer. Fourth, he fattens his cattle. And finally, step 5, if he has enough left over, he feeds his pets. So the pets are dead last on the priority list. And here is the massive aha moment that unlocks modern price theory. Because the pet food is the need of smallest importance, that specific use establishes the value of the entire stockpile. Think about it. If the farmer loses 1 sack of wheat to a fire, he doesn't starve. And he certainly doesn't stop brewing his beer. He simply stops feeding his pets. This utility at the final, least important edge is what economists call marginal utility, and it serves as the absolute basis for the valuation of his entire stock. This proves something deeply philosophical. It shows that the individual, not some abstract collective or macro state design, is the ultimate driver of the economy. We call this methodological individualism. By focusing entirely on the subjectively feeling and acting individual making choices in the moment, the Viennese schools showed that all economic laws can be traced back to basic human action and deliberation. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the legacy of Vienna. We've explored 3 incredible shifts in human thought today, but you might be wondering, why does this matter to us right now? Well, because these aren't just dusty old theories, they are the active blueprints for our modern world. They are the foundations of modern serialist music that influences the film scores you listen to today. They built the framework for objective museum curation that decides how we view history. And they birthed the subjective market pricing that dictates the global economy we live in right now. The frameworks born in late 19th century Vienna are literally still the operating systems running these major fields globally. The philosopher Theodor Adorno once described this era beautifully. He called it a veritable message in a bottle addressed to an unknown and uncertain future. Now, he was specifically talking about the 12-tone method there, but it perfectly summarizes the visionary, forward-looking nature of all 3 Viennese schools. Out of the crucible of a rapidly changing, turbulent city, these thinkers sent brilliant intellectual messages into a future they couldn't possibly have predicted. As we look back at the incredible leaps made in 19th century Vienna, I want to leave you with this final thought to spark your own curiosity about the future. What unique environment today, with its own tensions, crashes, and booms, is incubating the ideas that will completely rewrite our tomorrow? Where will the next great crucible of human innovation be? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating explainer with me.